Okay, so we've gotten this far, and now it's time to get to one of the more tedious parts of getting this right. It's the way I like to do it, just because it looks a lot better and it's a lot easier to control. You could make an FK setup for these joints down here, but I don't know why anyone would actually want to do that, because that would be a lot of keyframing and animating. The best thing to do when you come to this thing is like just make set-driven keys. And what set-driven keys are, basically, it's creating attributes with values. For instance, this controller right here has a attribute of the pinky control from, say, like 1 to 0. So in other words, I can actually type in a value 0.3, type in a value 0.4, or I can actually kind of turn it around here so you can see it. Actually just select this right here, and then in the viewport, middle mouse key, and then left and right, and kind of just see how the bend goes like that. And then that way you can kind of adjust basically any values or your fingers, and then every time you basically key the hand controller, it will key that value. And just like the way the scale and translation of everything works, it just adds to the attribute table up here. So let's talk about how I did this right here. And I don't really need to back up and show you how I do that. I'll just kind of continue on. So you have your controller selected. Right, the mouse is not cooperating. You need to be in the animation tab for this. Or actually, let's create a attribute for the index finger here. Or no, that's the ring finger. Let's do this one next. So edit attribute. Editor, you want to add an attribute. The long name, this is what's going to be called over here. So I've already made a pinky control. Now I'm going to make a ring control. You could just name it ring. Keyable, you want it as a floating. This is where you type in your minimum and maximum values. You could actually make this at 10. Sometimes what people like to do, actually, if it's more realistic, is to give it a bend back and actually give it a negative. Say if I gave this thing a -2, you could actually have the pinky bend back, because if you notice you in your fingers, whenever you totally extend, your fingers kind of bend almost back, you know. You could do that, but I'm just going to keep this at 0. So the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 1, and I'm going to add. So all of a sudden it's over here now. So we close this up. So we've created our attribute. So now we basically need to add a movement and a set-driven key to this. So this is where it gets a little confusing. You're in the animation tab, you go to key, set-driven key, set. This box comes up. So what this is your driver and your driven. Basically, if I'm driving my kid to school, I'm the driver. Well, my kid's following me, he's being the driven. So whichever way I go, he's going to follow. So basically we have to key in basically what attribute we want to follow. So the driver is going to be this controller here. So we need to load the driver. Control wrist is our driver. Now we need to select which control, because we don't want this whole thing. We got to single in one thing. So we want the ring control to be our driver, basically. So now we need to select driven. Well, it's going to be these 3 joints right here. So I'm going to go over to my ring joints, and I'm going to select them over here because it's kind of hard to select them over there. And I'm just going to select those 3. I'm not going to select that null because I don't care what that null does. So this is going to be my driven, load driven. Those joints come up. So now basically what we need to do is select what state that these things are going to be moving on. So in other words, I don't really want to key anything like this. I don't see a point in that. So the only thing I'm really going to be setting is the Z state. And that's important because whenever you select all these right here, all your attributes come over here. So we are going to select our rotate Z. This is going to be our driven right here. Now, before you key anything, you need to make sure that this is the state of 0. So this is going to be our 0 state. So we need to kind of just check it in the control wrist right here. Everything's on 0. So I'm going to key these joints for this state at this value right here. So everything is lined up exactly like I want it. Sometimes I like to select these things just to make sure that they're being keyed. So I'm going to key this at 0. If you notice, the rotate Z has a 0 value, the joint there. Nothing's probably going to add or change this. This is where it's going to be, this is where the fun starts, I guess. So now we're going to move it to a different state. So I'm just going to move these controllers basically to where I want my value of 1 to be at. So that one is there, but just make sure you move them on the Z axis though. So this is my curve. So I'm going to go back to my control wrist and I'm going to type in 1. Probably need to do that after. So I'm going to make a new state. I'm sorry. Make a new state of 1. So this is where I want these things to be at the state of 1. So I have my driver selected, my ring control selected, all of my joints are selected here, and my rotate Z. So I'm going to key this. Okay, so now basically, if we back out of here and just look at this, it's at the state of 1 now. So if I change this back to 0, they pop back into place, and I can also use this as like the way to kind of manipulate these things. I can select both of these now. I have a nice little curl for these two. And we just kind of keep on chugging down the line here. We'll do the next one. That's the middle finger. Probably don't need to type control in. I'm going to go ahead and add my other ones too while I got this box up. So the index control. Zero, 1. Oops. And I need to do another one for me old thumb there. This can be done for any objects, basically. You don't have to use joints. I use set-driven keys a lot for certain things. I mean, like for robotical type stuff, for geometry. Like if you've got a button, you can, if you move the button on a scale, start scaling the button, it can scale other objects too. So, cool. Now I want to set my states. So everything's on 0 already, so I know that's going to be my initial state here. So back to key, insert key, or set driven key. My driver, I want to do the middle control. Now I'm done with the ring, my middle joint. These are my driven. Don't need that. Rotate Z. We'll key it to 0. So now I'm going to set a new state for these joints up here. Oh, I need to change this to 1. That one works. Now, this is something you may have to do like over and over to try to get it right. It took me a little bit to begin with to kind of understand, but once you kind of get to understanding the point of your keying states in, or your keying states basically to a certain rotation, it kind of starts making sense. So let's do the index now. Control wrist is going to be my index. It's on 0. I don't want these joints. I want my index here. These are going to be my driven. Those. Go back out and change this to 1. Move these joints. Zero. Let's key that. Let's check that thing. Is it working? Now thumb. Now the thumb is always a little different because you can actually key it in 2 states. I mean, the thumb bends like this guy. It would obviously bend down, but you could also bend it on this axis too. I'm just going to use the Z. Bend it like the rest of them. I have keyed it in 2 states. You need to make kind of 2 controllers basically over here because you'll have because one state won't be affected by unless you kind of move it in space. I guess if you could do it like this and move it inward like this and then key all these attributes at work, but I'm just going to kind of, to keep it for simple sake, just do like how we've been doing it on the Z axis. So I'm going to do the thumb control. These are going to be my driven. Take Z on the 1. I already know it's on 1. I want to go back and change this to, or I'm sorry, on 0. Now it's on 1. I want to change the rotation of these. Okay, Z. Go. So that is how you do it. I mean, if I were to select all these over here, now I've got like a nice little hand grip over here that I can kind of adjust values on. Things working really good. I'm going to save my work. Basically, these are going to work the same way. That's a Z. Yep. So I'm going to go through and do these real quick, and I'm going to pause this so you don't have to watch me. But yeah, just so we can make sure it works. So give me 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm coming up on my last one here. Things working really good. Got my thumb I still need to do, so I want to do my thumb control, and I want to select the joints in my thumb on my right side. Flow driven. I'm just going to test this right here to see how that would, if I could sit there and do it. So I would be moving it on the Z and the Y. Let me just run a test real quick. So I'm going to Z, like Z and Y. I'm going to key that to 0. And I'm going to select the thumb control and set it to 1. And I'm going to move the rotation. I know my thumb would curl like this. also going to move it like that. See why it wouldn't work. I just remember trying it like this. Now's the big test. Yeah. I mean, it moves in both states. The thing is you've got to remember that you're not going to be able just to have that Z movement. Basically, it's always going to curl in. The thumb will never kind of like do this state right here. So if you're fine with that, cool. But you know, if you wanted to go back and change it, it will work. But you can select 2 of these attributes though. I'm going to set it back to 1 and redo it. Like the other side, just keep it uniform. But feel free to do that though if you want to. Done here. Cool. We got some working hands here. This hand's working good over here. Nice. So that's how to set driven keys. I'll leave a link in the bottom so you can read about it, but you can do that for really any objects, you know, besides joints. It can be done for geometry. You can have one item over here moving. Say if you had a 2 objects over here. If you wanted to affect the scale by moving this one, you could. Let's see if I can do this really fast. So the sphere, say that's going to be my driver, the translate X. This is going to be my driven, sphere 2, and I want the scale to be affected. So if I wanted to move this right here, I could set it like this. So now, scale. I don't want to. Oh, that's what I'm talking about. I have to go back and recreate it, but so nix that what I just said. I'd have to think about that. Yeah, it can be done with like telescopic movements, I guess. If you had like a controller that you were pulling out of a telescope, I've seen a student do that before. Have a controller, just it only goes so far, so the telescope kind of runs with it, the different controllers for the different states of the different scope. So, but it's really handy when it comes to joints and fingers like this. So next, moving on, we'll go ahead and pair everything up and kind of make a world controller for it, try to get it organized and cleaned up, and I'll try to drop in like a look to constraint I usually use for the eyes sometimes. So okay, thanks for watching.